So I'm making this video because I keep seeing disparagement towards Gen Z online and outrage over them coming from old people. And by old people, I mean 30 years of age and over. Most people would set like 1997 as when Gen Z starts. So that means the oldest members of Gen Z right now are 29. Over 30, over for you. You are UNC status. We got the nursing home right there. It's time to check in. You know, I've been seeing studies of, oh, Gen Z's, you know, the least intelligent generation. Why are you coming at me like that, UNC? All right, I've seen, you know, there'll be headlines about polling results from Gen Z and angry UNCs typing away in the comments. So I'm making this video to kind of talk about that generational disconnect and false perceptions about Gen Z, and when some words of encouragement for my fellow Zoomers to not take this shit, okay? And so I'll talk about this first post, which is kind of what inspired this video. And I'll, if I can find it, I'll put it on screen. But it's basically it's a Tumblr post from a therapist, and she's talking about her Zoomer client, and she says that her Zoomer client is super worried about all of these things, and she says everybody's talking about these problems with the world. And so the therapist tells her client, well, not everybody's talking about those problems. None of my friends talk about those problems. And she kind of gets at discovering that she's seen a lot of people talking about these problems on TikTok. And so she also says, well, my TikTok feed, nobody talks about these problems. My TikTok feed is just cocktail recipes. So, and it kind of rubbed me the wrong way in the way that these older generations talk down to us. Because on one hand, the therapist is right. She's actually doing her job, which is, you know, not something you can say for a lot of therapists. She's right for talking this client out of this, you know, mentally sick TikTok rabbit hole. Let me get a water. I don't know what to do with my hands, so I need to hold something. And so she's talking her out of this mentally sick rabbit hole, but her means of going about it is just like totally like the issue I have with it. Because the right way to do this would be to say, hey, TikTok is made up. It's not real life. It's the internet. Touch grass, talk to some real people. The TikTokers you're looking at are mentally sick individuals. That's how you should approach it. But instead, she kind of enforces like a kind of authority from her generation down onto this Zoomer girl and says, well, your generation is worrying about these problems, but actually my generation isn't, so you don't need to be worrying about those problems. And I especially love the little bit she threw in with her TikTok algorithm. It's just pure comedy. She's not saying TikTok's not a valid place to be forming your worldview. She's actually saying, well, actually, my TikTok algorithm says, you know, we should be worried about cocktail recipes. She's not discrediting TikTok. She's just saying her algorithm is more important, or you know, sets a precedence over the girls. You know, for everything you could say about these mentally ill people on TikTok, they realize there's problems in the world and they're trying to solve them, which is more than you can say for the therapist and a lot of these older generations. They're truly the generations of bread and circuses. Right? She's saying, don't worry about problems in the world. You can just drink. Right? A better approach, and maybe she did do this and it just didn't make the Tumblr post. But what she should do is be giving her client the tools to say, all right, what's a real problem we should worry about and what's a fake mentally ill TikTok problem? And how do we address the problems in the world without, getting into a whole mind fuck? So, but instead she just says, oh, well, us older generations don't worry about making the world a better place, so you shouldn't either. And it's what inspired me to make this video. Really kind of like just rubbed me the bad way. Let's make sure my phone hasn't overheated. Excellent. All right, so the second content I saw that I really wanted to talk about, and it was like divine providence. It came up on my YouTube feed as I was working on gathering my thoughts together for what I wanted to say in this video. And it was by comedian Mark Normand, who overall, I think he's a respectable comedian. It's not Kevin Hart or a female comedian or something like that. But it was a very disappointing video. It was, can Gen Z take a joke? And you could just tell that they had an idea of what they wanted out of this video, right? I mean, just based on the title. The wind's blowing my phone over. Obviously, they're hoping to make a video where Gen Z can't take a joke. There's no drama to a video where, everybody can take a joke and it's all good. But it really showcased, I think, the way that people sort of have their idea of what Gen Z is like, and then the reality of what Gen Z is actually like. And they stacked the deck so hard in this video to try to get what they wanted. First of all, it was all female audience. So they had at least some understanding of what Gen Z is like. Because if you had the boys in there, Mark Normand would have been the one, huddled over, rocking back and forth, saying, oh, you can't joke about that. You can't joke about that. So it was this hand-picked audience of women only, septum rings and everything. And they were trying so hard in the editing to kind of get what they wanted out of this video. But the reality was that the audience had, I would say, a pretty average, normal reaction to a comedy show. They laughed at pretty much all the jokes. Some of the, like edgier ones, there was like, ooh, in the audience, but it wasn't like, from the title of the video, you're expecting, people to get up and stomp out and, heckle and all this stuff. And that didn't happen at all. Like, the worst things that happened was there was a couple people in the audience who were just kind of straight-faced, and the editor would zoom in on them and be like, 80% offended. They were scraping the bottom of the barrel. I think any comedy show, you're just gonna have people like that. It's just not their thing, etc. And the worst part was the comments, because you would think everyone in the comments just hadn't even seen the video, because every single one is like, oh, those Gen Z, they're such snowflakes. They're, they can't take a joke. Back in my day, we could take a joke. And I think this shows that among the older generations in the world at large, there's a very false perception of what Gen Z is actually like. And I think the reason is, partially I think it's, for so many years now, the millennials have been the young generation. And so that idea of what a millennial is has kind of carried over into, how we think of Gen Z. Also, these sort of cultural elements that are taken from Gen Z and then blasted to the moon and back and amplified, it's not Gen Z who amplifies those things, right? Because think about this. Oldest Gen Z right now is 29. Hold on, I'm hearing noises. Did we just shut off? Nope. Very good. Because think about this. The oldest Gen Z right now is 29. So if you were going for some kind of career path that is, if you're going for some kind of career path that is really schooling intensive, if you're a doctor, a lawyer, a PhD, you're just now entering the workforce. And even if you're not, right? Let's say you're following just a normal corporate path out of college. You're maybe on your second or third job. You've barely kind of gotten into the ranks of the world. You know, like me personally, I did freelance work for 3 years after college. I've only completed 1 year so far in the corporate world. The people who are picking Gen Z culture to amplify is not Gen Z, it's millennials and Gen X. Those are the decision makers in this corporate marketing world. And I think if you stopped to think about it for a second, it's kind of obvious. Like I saw a study recently about Gen Z's perception of like Gen Z catchphrases like 6'7" and Labubu and all that, and it was overwhelmingly negative. Gen Z hates that shit. The people who are amplifying it, even if it came from Gen Z, we would have never spread it around. It would not have caught on. The people amplifying it are those millennials. And all of those things have millennial cringe written all over it. Like, you know that if The Office was still running today, they would have 6'7" in it. They would talk about Labubus. All right, that is millennials who are amplifying that stuff. And so then it's created this false image of Gen Z as like just stupid goofballs who don't know anything. And I'm glad we're finally getting some Gen Z figures of notoriety like Nick Fuentes and Clavicular, because it's kind of a better representation of radicals and mentally insane people. And, you know, if you're really paying attention, over the past couple of years, and into the next years, Gen Z is actually sort of coming into their own, is actually establishing themselves in the world. And so there's going to be a lot more actual brushing up against them with the older generations. And over the past couple of years, if you were paying attention, you could have seen a more accurate look at what Gen Z is actually like. If you're paying attention to the demographics in the 2024 election, certainly post the Trump election, with seeing how his approval has tanked with this younger generation. And unless you're hands over your eyes like this, the reality is President Trump's approval tanked not because he was too conservative, not because Gen Z was like, oh my gosh, we hate this. We're gonna vote for Democrats in the future. That's not why. All right. And some recent polling has been done about Gen Z opinions. And so that brings me to this sort of last piece of content I wanted to talk about. And it was this, I'll throw it up on screen just briefly, but it's this therapist guy talking about these polling results of Gen Z opinions.
A new horrific study just dropped, and the numbers about Gen Z men are genuinely disturbing.
Holy physiognomy, bro. I think I could know every one of this guy's opinions just by looking at him. But, I mean, basically the whole video, he's just clutching his pearls and saying, you know, how could they believe this? This is so bad, you know, he literally says that he blames that social media for Gen Z having these radical different opinions. He says basically, you know, he's implying that we're just mentally sick from social media algorithms, and there's no other reason for it, right? And where do you all, you old people, get off thinking you can say we're so horrible and say, oh, I can't believe it. The world that we were born into, the world that we're formed by and reacting to, is the world you all created, right? The world is shit, and you all are the ones squatting with your pants down. And I can hear the millennials furiously typing away. I'm a 40-year-old child. It's not my fault. 40 is young. Okay, bro. Okay. You're a victim too, I'm sure. Man. Where was I? But yeah, there's never been a point in history where our civilization had more potential for what we could be achieving, and yet the state of things is worst it's ever been in living memory. Okay, so like you guys, you unks have had your time. All right, you kind of don't get to have opinions anymore. Like it's time to check in. All right, you know, so you guys don't get to sort of discredit the way we think and the things we think as not valid because we've tried it your way. You've had your shot to shape the world as you want it. Like this guy mentions in his video, the boomers are way more progressive than Gen Z. Well, boomers, we've had your decades of progressivism and it's gotten us to where we are today. So we're gonna try things Gen Z way. And so if you're 30 or older, you kind of don't get to have an opinion anymore. And you can shake your fist at me and say, well, I'm gonna have my opinions anyways. But ultimately, over the next 10 to 20 years, what's gonna happen is you can have your opinions, and over time, it's just gonna boil down to you only can have two possible opinions. Whatever the subtleties of your opinions are, whatever you think they are, all that's ultimately gonna matter is, are you on board with the Gen Z way of thinking? Are you in sync with Gen Z? Or are you working against us, protecting the status quo? That's all it's gonna basically be boiling down to. Gen Z wants to bring change. We're going to bring change, all right? And back to my analogy, we're trying to clean up the poop and you're hissing and screaming at us and saying, no, we like pooping out here on the floor. Stop it. And we're like, what the fuck? All right? So basically, and this is not a hate video towards you unks, all right? We forgive you for ruining the world. Genuinely. This is just sort of this is almost like a forewarning because you can see it online that there's this shock and horror because there's an inaccurate idea of what Gen Z is, and now we're coming into our own. And so I am making this video to, if you're an unk, prepare you for, you know, this is what Gen Z is actually like. And this is kind of what's coming as we become the generation with an increasing amount of power in the world. And, you know, to my fellow Zoomers, it's basically a cry to take anything an older generation says with a grain of salt. You don't need to throw it out just full sail automatically, but take it with a grain of salt because because the boomers are, you know, one of the most self-indulgent, I would say, generations. They're, you know, and at their age, they're just trying to sort of protect safety and stability, and they don't want anything to change. Gen X, mainly their personalities literally revolve around pop culture of their heyday. Anytime I've ever seen Gen Xers get together, all they do is talk about bands and music and TV and movies, especially from, you know, the 80s and, you know, other decades past. And millennials, you know, their guiding compass is kids' cartoons, basically. And that's the other thing. This is, I might edit this earlier into the video, but you can tell that there's a total difference in Gen Z in these past three generations, because the past three generations all have this kind of nostalgia for their heyday. The boomers are, you know, the pinnacle of talking about, oh, in my day. The Gen Xers, like I said, the Gen Xers are, you know, obsessed with the pop culture of their heyday and think that the 80s were the best time ever. And the millennials, of course, glorify the hell out of the 90s. And you don't really see that from Zoomers. There's not the same kind of glorification of the 2000s and the 2010s. If there's any kind of nostalgia there, it's usually, oh, things weren't as bad. Things are worse than they were back then. It's not like things were great then. We have not known anything except an evil world. All right. So take anything the older generations say with a grain of salt. You know, if some older guy is saying, "Oh, how come you don't have a girl, man? You just gotta go to a bar and chat up a girl." Okay, Grandpa. All right. How's your third divorce working out? Trying to tell me what to do? Trying to tell me how it is? All right. Oh, you can't say that traditional gender roles are good. You can't say that. Oh my goodness. You know, clutching my pearls. Okay, Grandma. I hope your slide decks hold your hand when you're on your deathbed. All right. We've seen you all trying it your way. We're going to try it our way. All right. So this is a message of empowerment to my fellow Zoomers that, you know, look, we talk about if an individual is popping off, we talk about they're on a generational run. Our generation is on a historical run, and it's really just beginning. Okay, like literally, like the first generation post the Industrial Revolution in hundreds of years, where church going has gone up, and the unks are just mad. They just be hating on us. All right, don't let it get to you. All right, we're gonna move the needle, carry the fire, restore civilization, and build a better world. All right.